Good evening and welcome to the fourth episode of Vivre L'Empreur. We have had a nice little hiatus of, what has it been, 4 weeks now?
3 weeks. 3 weeks. 4 weeks. No one's counting because no one cares about this show that much.
We have one viewer, and to be frank, he's probably just here to give us shit. Hello, Dean, in the chat.
I prefer to think of it as Dean is looking to educate himself on the history of France and liberty in general since he lives in a tyrannical state.
I mean, he does live in a tyrannical state, but I don't think that he's here to educate himself. He's here for white noise while he draws.
That also could be the possibility.
But anyways, we do have an exciting show for you today, and especially since Aldous has apparently written 3 pages of notes to get us to Malta.
Yes.
We are going,
which technically is not even the beginning of the Egyptian campaign.
Fucking Christ. So this is Egyptian campaign part 1, the prologue. All right, Aldous.
Okay, so
let you take the floor.
When we last left our heroic leader, he was marching back successfully from a campaign in northern Italy. Napoleon's on his procession back to Paris. The treaty has yet to be signed, but it's being prepared. The diplomats are doing their thing. And Napoleon's coming back to Paris, the hero. He's presenting himself as the savior of peace, not as the heroic victor, which is very important because it's all about image. And especially right now in the Directory-led France, this is vitally important because he's viewed immediately upon his lightning success in northern Italy as a threat. And this march is reminding a lot of people who are very well educated, much more than today, of the march of Caesar back to Rome. Napoleon does a number of things on his march back to Paris. He does not go directly to Paris. He takes a semi-indirect route and hits every major town. In each town that he comes through, he's led by a huge vanguard of hussars, all decked out in their uniforms, in a golden carriage, and it's just, he's always the victor. He's always pleasant. He's basking in this, but no, I'm not a victor. I'm the savior of peace, the savior of peace. More importantly, ahead of him, 100 handpicked soldiers from the rank and file, which is something that's very Napoleon. You're going to see this time and time again, whether it's commanders that rise up through the ranks due to heroics or excellent, command and control, or just, they're really smart. He's not afraid of taking a commoner out of the line and giving him an officership. So 100 soldiers from the rank and file are preceding this grand column. And these are men that did glorious things throughout the Italian campaign. Grenadier Cabral of the 32nd Line was honored for his heroics at the Battle of Lodi, famously. Colonel Dupas, who led the sacrificial charge at Lodi, is also in there. Lieutenant Joubray of the 85th Regiment, famously with 30 French regulars, captures 1,500 Austrians after Aventi's panicked retreat. So this is just a sampling. They're really pushing the heroic soldiers and everything that they have that this victory is theirs. And this only endears Napoleon more to both the citizenry and his army. Nobody does this in continental Europe. Nobody lets the honor guard, the preceding guard, be the soldiers. Usually it's always the general, and then the train is the army. This is inverted. And this is revolutionary. And of course, the public, in the midst of the post-revolution Directory movement, are even loving this even more.
And as we push on from there, we have tripled our viewership this evening. We are at 3 people in the chat. We've been joined by Crazy Mad and Hojo. Crazy Mad had mentioned that this was until this puts me to sleep, to which Nine Realms Publishing, the classiest YouTube channel ever, said Aldous does have a lovely storytime voice. So
there you go. So what does this all mean? what this means is Napoleon is projecting something that's very important, and it becomes much more important in the coming years. But right now, he's projecting the image that this is not Napoleon's victory. This is not Napoleon's army's victory. This is France's victory. This is France's army's victory. And it's because of the people that make up the army. It's the people's army. The revolution was the people's revolution. This is truly the people's army. He understands everything that's going forth and revolving around this. And he's really playing heavy into it. So he finally arrives into Paris and he's given a hero's welcome. The Directory has a warm reception. They have a luncheon. But there's massive concern, again, because of the similarities to Caesar. And the Directory finally meet with Napoleon, and they're enthralled. I mean, it's very cold at times. I mean, there's a lot of placation going on in the speeches that are given. But at every turn that Napoleon is given a chance to speak, he's praising what the Directory is doing, and praising liberty, and praising the Constitution, and talking heavy about everything that the Directory is doing, and that this is the citizenry, and this is France, this is the new France. And so as things begin to ebb and begin to kind of get back to normal, Napoleon's immediately going like, okay, I got to do something else. He doesn't want to get caught up in the muck of the politics of Paris, because it becomes readily apparent that he's the hero today, but in 2 weeks, no one will remember him. And he wants to keep that impetuous moving. He wants his star to continually rise. And the legality, the bureaucracy it's dragging that down. And for a period of time, the next move the Directory wants to make is an invasion across the Channel at England. And they start doing really arguably a really fantastical movement forward logistically of building ships and getting an army organized. And Napoleon is put in charge of that army. And this lasts for a period of several months before Napoleon's finally able to convince people that really the best path to defeat Britain is, because France has a small navy, but nothing that can compete Britain at this point. France has shown that they're able to successfully accomplish something on land with the Northern Italy campaign and their success in the southern German states, but they have not, as of this time, ever succeeded at all against the British on the seas, nor has anyone really. I mean, the British at this point, they're at their high water mark. They will suffer a few minor naval defeats, but you have to remember, from 1812 until 1914, the British don't suffer a massive naval loss. It's over a century of just
pretty much entire domination.
Right. And really, even, I mean, it's arguable that you could cite 1812, because other than the death of Nelson, they really don't get their ass handed to them at all for about 140 years. But
I mean, navally, we outperformed them in the War of 1812 here in the Americas. But I would hesitate to say that they got their ass kicked, because they didn't really send their top tier fleets or anything.
Right. Well, even when they do, as a huge sidebar, even when von Sleeten fleet in off of the coast of Chile in World War I, he sinks, I think, 3 cruisers and kill, I think, 1,600 British. They're auxiliary sailors. They die. They weren't even professional naval men. There was an auxiliary fleet. It's one of the biggest black eyes on Churchill ever, as far as well, maybe not the biggest. Gallipoli sitting out there, but
I was going to say, like, Gallipoli certainly,
but out. as any aristocratic Brit would say, fuck the Australians. So so back to France, where people would not say fuck the Australians, because they're people, and unlike the British aristocracy, the French appreciated their people. Napoleon's able to convince the Directory eventually. Yes, and I apologize, Blue Samurai. I do have a little bit of a head cold. So he is able to convince the British aristocracy that we're going to, take the formulation of this army they were planning on sending over to fight Britain across the Channel, and we're instead going to send it into the Med. And the reason they're going to go into the Med is because we're going to go after Alexandria. Alexandria being the northernmost port in Egypt. It's the hub of British trade. You have to keep in mind at this point, the Suez Canal does not exist. So a lot of the East Indian trade is coming up from southern Egypt. It's going north and then across the Nile, and then it's going out of Alexandria into Europe. So if the French can take Egypt, they're cutting in half the British transportation cost. They have to go all the way around Africa or all the way around South America to get to the East Indies, which India is their big moneymaker.
Well,
And Napoleon, go ahead. I'm sorry.
To really quickly to jump in on this, because you were mentioning something that's very important, is Suez Canal doesn't exist yet, but Napoleon. This really just goes to show the foresight this guy has, because Napoleon still sees the intrinsic value of Egypt, and the British did too. British and French control relations in Egypt will go on from this point where you have Napoleon coming in the 19th century, and they will be the two powers kind of vying for control over influence over Egyptian politics for the next century, leading up to World War One.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, and Napoleon really sells the Directory on this concept by saying that the road to London leads through Alexandria, because you're going to cut in half Britain's trade wealth and the logistics that they currently have. And it's an extraordinarily valid argument. It's interesting though, because this is again, you just spoke to the foresight of this man. And as we get into the construction of the army, this will become even more prevalent and more evident. But there's a secondary reason for this. And this, one of the secondary reasons that's often not discussed in a lot of the texts that talk about the advantage of going to Egypt instead of facing Britain directly. There was a loose agreement between the Ottoman Empire and France for decades because they both hated the Austrians. With the signing of the treaty following Napoleon's success in northern Italy with the Austro-Hungarians, there is no longer a reason for the Ottomans to be friends with the French. The French no longer have hostilities with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the Ottomans it's kind of one of those where, like, it was cool when you went to the dance and you didn't have a partner, but now you have a partner and I don't, so we're not friends anymore. And the Ottomans are also looking at Egypt the Egypt at this time it's ruled by a loose conglomeration of Malamuks. And the Malamuks were traditionally Eastern European, Ukrainian, Georgian, Coptic slaves that were captured by Muslim tribes and indoctrinated or raised under Islam and then put in charge. And this has been going on for centuries, and they were in charge of it. They were loosely allied to the Caliph and the Sultan, but it was real loosey-goosey. There wasn't a whole lot of structure down there. The British operated down there basically on a whole lot of payoffs and bribery. The French are looking to go in and bring civilized society, to bring education. And this is serious. This is, as they're constructing their expedition, this is what they're bringing. So they have an army of about 40,000. Realistically, it's about 38,000 actual soldiers. Interesting of note, it's over 2,000 officers with roughly 40 field. I couldn't find a good number. Some places said 38, other places said 45 field pieces. Some places said 15, other places said 22 siege guns. So there's no direct amount of artillery, which is really strange in this time because the logistics should be accurate. I found multiple pieces, but either way, 40 field pieces, 20 siege guns. The inordinate number of officers was directly a part of Napoleon's plan, because he really thought that he'd move in here and it would be very similar to what he saw in northern Italy as he was taking and liberating some of the smaller Italian states, that he would be able to build auxiliaries and put French officers in charge. You don't really see that. But he is planning ahead. He's trying to plan ahead. Now, the Directory did fuck him more than once.
I was about to say,
Um,
is like that needs to come into the story because the directory, as you mentioned, Napoleon returns earlier, and the directory is none too pleased to have this guy that has soared in popularity. I believe in one of the earlier streams we were talking about, obviously, whiff of grape shot. Directory at this point in time is not the most popular entity on the block, but they are the people making law, and they are the people that are representing France. And so Napoleon coming in, and he's got this popularity from the was it First War of the Coalition, right?
yep.
Um, so we like he's got the popularity of First War of Coalition, where he literally took Italy, which was not even meant to really be anything, and turned it to like the main show of everything. And so he comes in, and he's got uh now he's got the popularity, he's in the public eye, people are cheering his name in the streets, and so the directory is in no way, shape, or form under any, I don't want to say obligation, but like under any motivation to help Napoleon out, because helping Napoleon means giving more legitimacy to this guy who is a very realistic threat to their sustainability. So
No, for sure. And so you've got as Napoleon's arranging his divisional command and his staff, he's obstructed several times. Originally of the 31 generals he brings with him, he wanted all 31 to be people that he knew from the Italian campaign. Um, the bureaucracy, politics, and even some shrewd moves on Napoleon's part himself. Once he finds out that he's not able to take the people that he wants, he sends some of his own personal picks to ambassadorial positions, to uh, other positions, so that he can open up, so he can cherry pick who he wants. And it's the names of who he picks here are really impressive. He's personally says that he'd like Rene Deco or Rene Nicolas de Gens to lead the medical corps. And this is the first time the French army will be going on expedition with a fully stocked medical corps, which is really vital because they're going into Egypt and they're going to have to march across the desert. They're going to be faced with plague and pestilence, and he makes sure that they're prepared with one of the best medical minds in France at the time. Interestingly, he also requests when he realizes that he's not going to be able to get his first choice, Eliezer Dommartin, as his commander of the artillery for the expedition. Dommartin was famously the person that he took over for at the siege of Toulon. So what he's doing here is a little bit of like easing over the political wound, if you will. He's elevating somebody that was lowered by the directory very shrewdly. The directory didn't make this move; Napoleon did. So there's no more ill will between him and Dommartin. In fact, if Dommartin has any ill will, it's now directed towards the directory, and he owes Napoleon something because he just got elevated back to his previous position. Um, uh, Interestingly, he picks Joachim Murat and Thomas Alexander Dumas, who's famously known as the Black Count, to lead his cavalry forces. And one of the directory's insistence is they put Louis Dessau in charge of one of the divisional commands, and that's he performed admirably under Moreau in Germany, while Napoleon was kicking ass in northern Italy. The Moreau up in Germany was doing okay. Of the divisional generals that did well under Moreau, Dessau did the best. The important part about Dessau coming along is that you get Louis Nicolas Devout and, more importantly, Jean Rop are now under the umbrella of Napoleon, and Jean Rap obviously will become very famous. Jean-Baptiste Klauber would be another divisional commander of note. He was known as an excellent strategist. He was one of the more experienced commanders despite his age. Also of note, on Kleber's insistence, Jean-Baptiste Bisser, a favorite of Napoleon, is brought along. Originally, he was not selected for the expedition. Bessiers was with Napoleon throughout the Italian campaign and was the head of the Guides, which were Napoleon's bodyguards. This would eventually become the Guards Cavalry. And this is kind of where that foundation really begins to build. It's going to be the second time you get a bunch more return. And similarly to how Kleber requests Bessiers requests a lot of junior officers. And you would see all of these men stay with under Napoleon's banner for the duration of this of his first trial, if you will. One of the marginal commanders. I mean, he wasn't of note. He wasn't exceptional, but he wasn't terrible. De Hillers was another one that was assigned. More notable than De Hillers being assigned was the fact that he was anchored with Jacques Francis Minot. Minot, aside from being completely inexperienced and dimmer than a fading candle, was really most famous for completely fucking up the royalist revolt at Vendôme. And you could excellently argue that if something needed to be fucked up, then Minot was your boy. Like, he is just completely inept as a commander. Did you have anything to add on any of those? Okay, I thought not. Moving on. Jean-Louis Renier is one of the other divisional commanders, another former artilleryman. It's important to note, and this is an interesting factor in a lot of the selections that Napoleon made for his divisional commanders. Time and time again, you will see him raise artillerymen before infantrymen. From brigade command to divisional command. This also mimics what Washington would do. Washington did something similar. If you were an artillerist and had artillery experience, he was more than likely to raise you to divisional aide de camp. He did so with Hamilton. He did so with several other men. Primarily, it's because the logistics of artillery are totally different and involve a much shrewder mind. Not a strategic mind, but a much shrewder mind. You can teach tactics and strategy. You can't teach logistics. Logistics are just it's a quality that you either have or you don't have. Napoleon understands that as a former artillerist, and he tries to move people into key divisional positions every chance he can get that you see it. Louis Andre Bon, go ahead.
To address some people that have joined us in the chat, we have been joined by Felix Haas, which is always good. A while back, we were joined by Neff. I'm not sure if he's still out there, but if he is, thanks for joining us. And Crazy Mad is here as well. Now, not to derail this, I'm not going to give this a lot of time, but Dean had mentioned that some weirdo was talking about how the Persians were the good guys in the Persian wars versus the Greeks.
Arguably in the first Persian War, they were.
Yeah, that's what I had even said, is they were certainly justified in invading at the Battle of Marathon and everything like that. I would certainly say that Darius had more than ample reason to invade Greece after what Athens pulled.
Athens fucked the whole province. I mean, let's be honest here.
Yes. But the Second Persian War, Xerxes was not only in the wrong just completely in terms of the Greeks, but the disaster of that campaign made his reign rather ruinous, and his reign ends and really starts to screw with the dynastic stability of Persia going forward. There's lots of infighting between his progeny and everything that we'll see in things like Xenophon and what have you. Is things get completely screwed up by how Xerxes handled things in the Second Persian War. But that's a whole other topic. I'm not going to dwell too much on it. We are here for Napoleon, but I figured that since Dean actually put something historical up in the chat, it was worth addressing. I apologize, Aldous.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Anything else you'd like to add on your little side brother?
No. Let's rock.
Okay. So Another divisional commander that would become very important is Jean-Louis Renier. Renier is a former artilleryman, like I mentioned. Also, he was a volunteer from Switzerland, which, since the treaty with Austro-Hungary, is now part of France. Um, Louis-Andre Baun rounded out the divisional commanders, and veteran of the Italian campaigns, known almost exclusively amongst his fellow divisional commanders as completely foolhardy in his bravery. He was renowned for leading regimental charges on foot. Unheard of at this time, his men loved him. And you'll see this time and time again. The people that Napoleon's elevating to divisional command, if you compare it to how the British or the Austro-Hungarians or the Roman or the Russians work, they do not do this. Guys that show this kind of foolhardy bravery are usually demoted. But in the French military under Napoleon, you do this kind of thing, you rally a regiment and charge on foot with your saber drawn in front of them, you're getting promoted because the men love you. And again, it all goes back to that. This is a French army. If the army is behind you, they will do anything for you. And when you get an army that's able to do that, you will accomplish amazing things. And when we talk about amazing things, just wait until we get till the Battle of the Pyramids. You will not believe the numbers that we're talking about here. And that's probably for episode 2. But moving on. That rounds out the divisional generals. You still have Berthier serving as Napoleon's chief of staff. Lannes is really weird. Napoleon appoints him as the quartermaster in chief. He moves him out of regimental command, despite everything that he showed in Italy as having a great strategic mind, which arguably might be brilliant because given the things that he did in northern Italy, Napoleon is more than likely seeing something in him and wants to pull him up, and he's probably grooming him at this point for corps command, based off of how he went from regimental to divisional on more than one occasion and did excellent in the Northern Italy campaigns. The immensely capable Eugene Beauharnais obviously returns as the intelligence chief for Napoleon. Durac and Joseph Solowski round out Napoleon's immediate aide-de-camps. Again, volunteers to the army. Of note, also, Louis Bonaparte, which is Napoleon's younger brother at this point, had completed his studies and joins his elder brother on campaign as well. At this point, plans had already been well and drawn up for Malta. They have built the fleet to go into the Mediterranean and accomplish this goal. The French espionage network has been working overtime trying to convince the British that they are going across the channel. So the British actually pull most of Nelson's Mediterranean fleet out and over towards Spain and Portugal, just in case. And that gives the French enough time to build up their logistics and actually get this thing underway. By the time in mid-May, when the British finally realize what the French are doing, Nelson is sent back into the Mediterranean, but at this point it's too late. And the French fleet is set sail. Now, when the French fleet sets sail, they're sailing with, like I mentioned, about 38,000 soldiers. They're also joined by 160 plus scientists, and these are archaeologists, botanists, chemists, historians. You name it, they're there. This isn't just a military expedition. This is a cultural expedition because this is what the Directory wants. They want not just a military conquest, but this has to be for the public good as well. We have to bring something back that enhances the culture and the history and the depth that the average French citizen can benefit from. And so in addition to that, they are also, Napoleon, in his wisdom, like you mentioned, is also bringing 400 private civilian experts. These are carpenters, these are builders, these are engineers, these are architects. And one of the goals of Napoleon is to see what the feasibility is for the Suez Canal. And going forward, the work that the French engineers do during the period of this expedition directly result in the Suez Canal's construction a century later. They're laying the groundwork for what they hoped would be a decades long venture, but it turned into be a century long venture. But without this groundwork being done, no one else has the forethought to be doing this. The British have been there for 50 years and they haven't done this. The French have the forethought to do this. And it's one of the direct means of Napoleon because he sees both the economic and the military aspect of if you can open up that canal and control it, if you can control that avenue between Egypt and Syria, then you're militarily, you control the Mediterranean. And then also that opens up an entirely different door into the Indian Ocean and the West Indies, which is Britain's bread and butter. And that gives you access to destroy them economically, which France understands it's what they have to do. They can't fight them militarily on the high seas. They can't go toe to toe with them as a navy. And that becomes readily apparent in the coming months. So do you want to continue from there?
Yeah, we can talk about that. So as you were saying, you know, the big thing that Napoleon is going to end up dealing with in Egypt is the navy. But up until this point, Napoleon has kind of maneuvered his way around that just by being ahead of him. Really, I don't think that the British would have guessed that Napoleon was going after what he was going after, and figuring out the ability of the Suez Canal as going back to what I had said earlier, showcases foresight as a commander. But really, what this is going to what is going to be set up here is Egypt is probably the engagement that defines that England is indomitable at sea. France is unbeatable on land at this point in time, and that's going to be what kind of defines Egypt altogether. Is whenever there's a land engagement in Egypt, Napoleon beats the tar out of the British. Whenever there's a naval engagement, Horatio Nelson makes Napoleon's navy look like shit.
Yeah. And it's important to note that at this time, comparatively, the French Navy actually outguns what Nelson has in the Med. And this will wait until issue 2 as to the disaster that happens. But for the dynamic action and speed at which Napoleon is able to execute his tactics and his military plans on land, the exact opposite seems to be true for every French admiral. They are inept, slow, and have no fucking idea what's going on. So if you to kind of take everything back a little bit, Napoleon's definitely in a rush to get out of France.
Yeah.
One of the reasons is the politics of what's going on with the Directory, and he wants his star to continue to rise. But given Ogden's insistence that we talked so much about Josephine that we had a full episode on it, I did want to mention this. Napoleon is also in a rush to get the hell out of Paris because Josephine was having a massive affair with Hippolyte Charles. And Hippolyte Charles was involved in a scheme that was a private company that was funding or providing the army with provisions, but was massively skimming off the top. And Josephine got roped into it. And it is only because Hippolyte Charles managed to say that she was not involved that she was not executed. So Napoleon was distancing himself from his wife and from all of the social interactions that thereof by getting the hell out of Paris at this time. Now, it's also of note that he could have divorced her because of this, because this all became public, but he didn't. He just leaves.
It is one of those things that does point back to they have a very weird dynamic. It is something to be said, and it's why there is such academic discussion on the relationship between Napoleon and Josephine, is things like that, where it's like he, as Alda said, he would absolutely had been in his right to divorce her. He would have been able to do it, especially under the marital laws of the time. But he stayed with her. So there's got to be there is something there between them, but it's really weird. He is no longer the lovesick puppy that he was at the beginning of the Italian campaign. The delusions of loyal Josephine have long been put out, but there is still something there between them.
For sure. So now we get to the first stone step of the Egyptian campaign, and that's Malta. And Malta is important because Malta is a huge trade route. If you control Malta, you control essentially the Western Med or the Eastern Med.
Yeah.
And that's France's first goal is we need to take Malta before we go down and we take Alexandria. Now, Malta has a long-standing history of massive sieges that just waste away at the attacker. Napoleon gets around this with a little bit of luck and a lot of just understanding the situation. Also, a shit ton of the benefits of the revolution. What do I mean by the benefits of the revolution? The benefits of the revolution are it's the spreading of this philosophy that everyone is equal under the law. Malta is essentially a feudal kingdom. So it's led by the Knights of St. John. The head of the Knights of St. John at the time is Ferdinand von Hopschinch. He's the Grand Master. And you really could not ask for a more perfect person to be in charge of a strategic island that you want to break, because this guy is a total inept fuck. he doesn't want to actually fight anybody. He just wants the situation to remain the way it is so he can eat comfortably and live in luxury. The French fleet, like I said, they lose Nelson, who's hot on their tracks, thanks to a well-placed storm. They reunite with Captain Marat's squadron, who they'd lost for several weeks. He was already scouting out Malta. Von Hemschmitz, as what he considers an act of nobility, offers 4 French ships to come into harbor. Napoleon, using this as a perfect excuse, feels immediately is insulted and orders an assault the next day. They order the assault. Renier's division goes to overrun the island of Gozo. Desailly's division assaults Valletta's fortress, and almost without a shot fired, surrenders immediate. And part of the reason that the surrender is immediate is because of this ideology among the Maltese that from all this beautiful French propaganda, and a lot of it's not even propaganda, it's just the truth.
It's just the spread, things have been spreading since the Enlightenment about the sovereignty of man and rights of citizenship and the dynamic between the governed and the governed and the governor. And so now with the French Revolution, as Aldous pointed out, is you've got this kind of powder keg of thought that is going everywhere, and it's tearing down what the French called the Ancien Regime, the old world order, really. And Malta is a part of that old world, and the people are hearing the propaganda. And it's very easy to start to buy in, to start to really follow this at a catastrophic rate when you're under siege and the guy that's in charge of your city is eating Versailles level meals and you're barely scraping by. And that's when you're in those moments of human desperation, that's when you've got the ideals of the revolution become very effective, not just as a platform for your own people, but as a weapon to use against your enemy.
For sure. This never even escalates to a siege. And there's
Yeah.
some argument as to how many shots were actually fired. But the fortress at Valencia basically gives up the ghost as soon as the French kind of go, hey, we're here. And within days, you have a signatory event, and the Knights of St. John cease to exist. They are over. There's no more feudal lords. Titles are relinquished. Malta is free, and regional governorships end up being set up under French guidance, and they've revolutionized Malta within a pattern of 4 days. Unheard of, amazing, and the people are for it. That's even more shocking. The people are for it. It's not a revolution where you're going, yeah, we're helping you. No, the people of Malta are excited for this.
It's not the don't worry, friend. We're doing this for you. It's like, I'm fairly certain you've got a gun in my face. No, like this is what a revolution from an ideal standpoint is supposed to be.
No, absolutely. And what you're going to see is this sets a precedent that sadly the French rely on too much. They think that this is what's going to result when they get to Egypt. And despite the fact that Napoleon is very well read in the Quran and he's very prepared for how to approach a conquest of a majority Islam nation, he's not prepared for what's going to happen because he doesn't understand how that society operates because he hasn't been there before. And this is one of the major mistakes in the entire campaign that Napoleon makes. He sees what happens at Malta and he thinks he can replicate this in Egypt, and it's not going to happen for a variety of reasons. Now, there are a couple of really cool things that happen in Malta as soon as the French take over. The Jews are allowed to build a synagogue. The Muslims are allowed to build a mosque because it's about freedom. This is wild in continental Europe. You don't have the church controlling things. Monarchies that are associated with the church aren't controlling things. This is truly about freedom of the people. This is what arguably our foreign policy here in America should be based on.
Well, and even from a standpoint of, you mentioned not even in continental Europe, even at this point in France, you aren't having this. Right now in France, religion is effectively outlawed. The only religion that there is that of the Supreme Being, that was established by Robespierre. At that point, it had kind of toned down a bit. But they still technically had this state religion, and that was the only thing that you could practice. And it was because of this that France, I believe, up to this point, had been excommunicated. And this is something that Napoleon is going to resolve when he becomes emperor very early on.
Yes, and also you will see that this unadulterated concept of freedom for all does not last long. Arguably it lasts only in those places where it creates stability, because you're allowing normally minority populaces that are very loud their own place to kind of coexist. If you get a homogenous society where people are angry, as you will see in Cairo when we get to that point, this level of, well, the people want this, that doesn't jive if it contradicts with what Napoleon wants. So it is definitely one-sided in its liberté has its limits with underneath this, but still, even within the context that it's being given, it's revolutionary. You're not seeing this.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's where I managed to burn through all my notes. So
outstanding. Well, then that gives us a chance to catch up on the chat, and then we'll probably close out a little bit early. I have
here's where the Ogden excuses start.
No, not an excuse. Sorry,
Just hit the chat,
been a
man.
weird day.
Just hit
All
the
right, so
chat.
let's take a look here. I'm trying to remember what the last. I want to say the Persians invade and John Travolta stopped them, and it's the thick thighs that do it. No grease, love. Fair enough. And Dean just realized the pun. That's good. Yeah. I don't even know what that's about. So I guess we're just talking about John Travolta in the chat. That's fun. We were joined by Jeremy, Low Crackhead here. It's good.
I just rather enjoy how you let the chat completely derail the show. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. It's good times. I'd like to imagine they're talking about Napoleon Dynamite.
We'd be happy to do an episode on Napoleon Dynamite if that's what you'd like.
Who would Uncle Rick be?
I don't know. I've never seen the movie. I will watch it for Dean though.
You haven't seen Napoleon? It is
there
a fantastically stupid movie.
Do you know how many films Gregory Peck was in that I haven't seen? Do you know how many films that Robert Mitchum was in that I haven't seen? Like if I have to pick, I could pick this great Gregory Peck movie or Napoleon Dynamite. I'm probably gonna pick that.
I mean, you're not wrong in that choice. Like if I had if people
time is finite. There's only so many things you can do.
To choose between Napoleon and 12 O'Clock High, I'm picking 12 O'Clock High.
I mean, my God, I think I read like 4 books for this episode.
read 4 books for this episode, and all I got was Odin derailing the chat, derailing the episode of the chat.
Well, it's I know it's more for my benefit. I brushed up on my Napoleonic Egyptian campaign.
How many books do you buy that you have a pile? Crazy mad. I mean,
well, everybody that buys books has a pile of books. Come
on. They're talking about like specifically backing crowdfunding books and having like a pile of Geminis.
Oh, I'm well aware.
If someone was like, read this book, then come on my show and shit on it, I might pick some of them up.
Hey, Crazy Mad, hit up Well Read.
I'll bear that in mind. Blue's leaving for the gym soon. When I got to CG, I thought there'd be better writing. Now I just want to read Ogden, Phil, and Kemosabe. Well, I appreciate that.
In argument on the Ogden comment, have you read Embrace One? Really?
Oh, Crazy Mad is like the #1 fan of the Embrace One. That hurts, Aldous.
Oof. Could have used a little editing.
Oh. It did have an editor.
Like I said. It's terrible in the best way.
I take being that's him talking about Napoleon Dynamite. But anyways, that gives us to 50 minutes, a little bit shy of an hour, but we're doing good things. Sorry,
no, it's fine. So episode 2 next week, hopefully,
will be part 2. We'll pick up from Malta, and
we have the invasion of Alexandria, the Battle of the Pyramids, the conquest of Cairo.
I will make sure that I will make sure I have more to say on that one. It's yeah. We will definitely catch you guys next time. And yeah, well, thanks for coming to hang out with us. We have 4 people. What's that? Is that a record for us, Aldous?
No, our record I think is 6.
All right. We're gonna beat it. We're gonna do it next week.
Yeah, in answer to Blue Samurai Zeros, it's the Egyptian campaign. This is the start of Napoleon's Egyptian campaign.
Yeah, this Blue. This whole show is about Napoleon. Vive l'Empereur. And right now we're focusing on the Egypt campaign, which is got a lot of content. Man, how the hell are we going to do the Peninsular War? Like, I know we're going to do it'll be a fuck ton of sharp clips.
It'll be a quarter easily, 3 months.
But it's going. There's going to be a lot to talk about.
We could do 2 episodes just on the Irish volunteers for the French army.
Yeah.
Let alone the deserters that went over to join the French army from the Irish, forced in servitude to the British army.
Well, I mean,
and the Portuguese volunteers. There's some great stories, man. Plus, you have in the Peninsular campaign, you have the birth of the concept of the fifth column.
Yep. But most importantly, in the Peninsular campaign, we have Sharp.
That's fictional, my friend.
Yeah, I know.
The great part about Sharp, for everybody, if you're looking to prep for our talk on the Peninsular campaign, Sharp is he's a regular officer that's raised through the ranks, and his experiences as a regular enlisted man that's raised to an officer is almost exclusively French in every aspect of how he gets promoted. It's exceptional bravery that allows him to be raised into the officership, and then at each major promotion, again, it's because of exceptional bravery or excellent command, which is again French style.
French thing.
Yes. You don't see that. It's exclusive. It's unique, and it's unique in the British Army because of its Frenchness.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for coming out. Aldous, it's always a pleasure. I apologize I have not been as talkative this episode, but I will make sure that I am better prepped for next time. And yeah, we'll see y'all next Tuesday. I was going to say Monday.
The lesson here is don't give me weeks, and then I won't have so much.
Well, no, like it's fantastic. You definitely held up the show tonight, and I appreciate it. But yeah,
we can still. I mean, we got some time. We can easily go into something like why Napoleon picked some of these divisional commanders, because we talked a little bit, I think 2 episodes ago, about some of the stuff that was going on in the 1750s and 1760s. And you have multiple schools of thought about where the French army needs to go. And you have new school and old school and some revolutionary schools. Napoleon's picking a lot of these commanders because they subscribe to these new and revolutionary schools of how the army needs to be organized and how logistics are done. And especially in their march through the desert that we're approaching, you're going to see why that's important. And especially at the Battle of the Pyramids, when you talk about how quickly the divisions are able to react, man, the grenadiers alone, and when you're talking about how important it is for local officers of regimental to be able to have autonomy and understand tactics, it's amazing what these guys do against the Malamukes. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, 100%. And it makes what happens ultimately in Egypt that much more tragic. But anyways, we will continue our Egyptian campaign next week, and it'll be nice because I won't have to edit the thumbnail much. I know that's a small thing, but it's nice to just literally change episode 4 to episode 5 and put it part 2 of Egypt. But it's good stuff. We got a great thumbnail for it. But we will catch you all here in a bit. Aldous, thanks once again.
And hey, if there's anything that you guys want, if you have questions or anything, post them in the chat. We'll be happy to answer on the next episode. If you find anything we said that was contradictory to something that you've read, let us know. We'll be happy to answer that as well. Unless it was just pure British propaganda, in which case,
Yes.
well, read another book, man.
All right, guys. Bringing us out with this.